Have you ever noticed that sometimes the biggest breakthrough in your life, it didn't happen when you were actually forcing it? In fact, it happened when you actually had the space and the time to think. And perhaps if you can resonate with some of these situations, perhaps your breakthrough came when you were going through a drive. Perhaps you took a walk. You sat in the porch and you just contemplated and you reflected on the current status of your life. Sometimes it may have even been like something like daydreaming and staring out through the window. And really, when you look at all these situations, the common thread is perhaps your breakthrough came or has come through a moment where life has forced you to actually slow down. And I know this may sound a little strange because I think a lot of us are accustomed to or programmed to think that progress often comes from getting after it, grinding more, hustle culture, working, pushing through, taking relentless action. But I think what I've come to learn more over the course of time is that sometimes the most important moments or the aha moments that I have personally reached and have personally observed and heard countless others even talk about as well is that it happens when we slow down enough to put ourselves in a state of reflection. And this is why I think things like meditation, for example, are very useful and very, you know, it is meant to slow our thoughts and our mind down to a point that we create space for whatever it is that we're wanting to achieve, trying to achieve. And I know for me, I've never experienced anything that I got from in terms of a new idea from constantly working, grinding, and quote unquote getting after it. In fact, my biggest ideas came from quiet moments. In fact, the idea for Elevatus and the next baseline of this podcast actually came from some of my more quiet moments. So, with that, I want to welcome you back on another episode of the next baseline. I'm your podcast host, Danny DeJesus, and this is the podcast where we explore the one central question, and that is what do we build now to reach our new and next baseline? Now, as a recap, in the last episode, we talked about the difference between an event and a transition, and that the event happens on a specific date and time, for example, but the transition unfolds afterwards. And we also explored the idea that many people are not necessarily stuck in their situations because of the event itself, but rather they're stuck because they're trying to return to a baseline that no longer exists. And after that, after that episode, I was led to think and ponder on another question. And that question is, why do some people eventually find their way forward while others seem to remain stuck in a situation or a negative situation for years on end? So you can have two people in the same environment, and it's like saying one is going to navigate an environment a certain way a lot faster and the other one's going to spend a long time just going over an endless loop over experiencing the same thing over and over again. And so I think we often see these situations if you live long enough and you can probably see this and resonate with some of the things I'm about to say. You can see plenty of people, for example, have experienced divorce, and some recover faster than others. You also see people that go through career change where some people embrace the change and they find something else relatively quickly, and others struggle for whatever reasons that they struggle. And so I'm sure you've often also seen people that have undergone difficult seasons and difficult moments in life, and they were able to somehow find a way to navigate and become stronger than they were before when they were started, despite the level of difficulty. But at the same time, you can see someone navigating a difficult season in their life, and then that season just becomes years and endless loops of conflict and disorder and chaos. So key question here is, what makes this so different? Why do some people thrive despite adversity, and some people just get stuck in the same loop for however long they get stuck for? And so, I think there's a lot of content out there, with respect to this question, that talks about taking action. And here's the thing, don't get me wrong. I do know and I do believe that taking action does matter, and it matters a lot. And because the truth and the fact of the matter is, nothing is going to change if it doesn't change. So nothing changes if nothing changes. But at some point, decisions have to be made, conversations have to happen, and then sometimes, in order for change to happen, we have to have the maturity to be able to take a step back. And so the more I thought about it, I think the more I realized something, that action is not where any story starts. So if you really think about it, we talk about action as if it's the key ingredient that's going to make our dreams come true. But I think there's also a part that we're missing behind that. Before there can be action, there must be clarity. We have to be clear on whatever it is that we're trying to achieve. We have to be focused. We have to be pointed. And with that, clarity often arrives in places, I think, that we haven't taken the time to value enough. Again, because we are in a culture, at least here I'll speak from culture I've seen here in the United States, is that we live in a culture and a world that everything's instant gratification. Everything is about taking action. Everything is about how to get after it. And again, I'm not faulting that. I'm not saying that's not a good thing, or there's not a time and a place for that. But I think before we keep even get there, I want us to explore one thing here. For example, think about the last time you genuinely had a good idea manifest that has come into your mind. Not something that someone has told you, and not something that you saw on social media, but a real deep insight that you have about something that you begin to explore, and how that something begins to change your perspective. And I want you to think about this. Think about a time that you experienced that. Where were you? And here's the thing. If I had to guess, if I was a betting person, you were not multitasking. You probably were not doom scrolling on your phone, and you probably weren't busy in between meetings and life happening, because life happens. In fact, where this was happening, you were probably deep in thought somewhere that was quiet. You had space to think. And you know what? There could have been some boredom. And here's the interesting thing about boredom, because I think people mischaracterize and misunderstand actually what boredom is, and they make it feel like boredom is a problem. Like boredom is something that we have to eliminate or escape. But what boredom does, and I think we have to remember this, and I think the way society is being built is, the more we can take out boredom out of people, what ends up happening is creativity becomes less. Boredom is a key ingredient to creativity. Because here's the thing, boredom creates space, it creates reflection, it gives you the space to do introspection, to observe yourself, to have a conversation with yourself, to increase the level of awareness you have all that to be said is it is my opinion and the opinion of many others out there is that boredom is where new ideas are born. And that is where possibilities begin to emerge as well. And I think one of the biggest challenges people face during transition is that they're trying to constantly fill the uncomfortable silence that we experience when we go through a transition. The silence, for example, after a relationship ends or after we experience a career change. The silence maybe after the move to a new city. We want to get out there. We want to we want to integrate ourselves into the community. We want to go after the nightlife. We want to see what that new place has to offer. And, silence, after life stops looking the way that it used to, silence can just feel different. And I understand why. I'm not faulting anybody who is trying to drown out silence, because truth be told, silence can be uncomfortable. Reflection can be uncomfortable, because when things get quiet, that is where we have to start confronting the truth and the reality. And the reality doesn't always tell us what we want to hear. And sometimes it actually tells us that the old chapter is actually over, that we can never go back to who we were, that it tells us that we have outgrown something. And it's something that, and sometimes it tells us that we're heading onto a version of ourselves that the life that we have can no longer support. And as uncomfortable as silence can be, I think this is also where true growth begins. And here's what I want you to take away also is that as you grow, your awareness is going to grow, and awareness is almost always going to come before taking any action. And once we become aware of something, and when I say aware, like really aware, we start preparing. We start learning, exploring, asking deep questions. We look at different possibilities. We start searching and exploring different answers. We start experimenting. We start looking for people who have walked and experienced a similar path that we're venturing on and we're journeying through. And then eventually all this preparation, what it's going to do is going to help you create and develop the confidence that you need. And it's not going to be complete confidence, but it's going to be just enough confidence where you are comfortable enough to take the first step forward. And when you can take this first step forward, even if it doesn't look perfect, it's going to give you the strength to take another step and then another. And then that's where we start to see where action now enters the picture. And this is where I think truly things really, really start to become very interesting. Because I never believed that life is simply a matter of just hard work and then boom, you have success. And I think it's pretty safe to say that as people we see, we likely, more than likely, almost certainly have seen people that work incredibly hard and still struggle. And at the same time, I never believed that success is simply just luck either. Because when people describe someone else's breakthrough as just luck, they're usually only looking at the moment in time that the opportunity itself appeared, but rarely are people looking at everything else that happened before it. We're talking preparation, reflection, the learning, the conversations, the risk, the action. So, which by the way, again, I just want to take the moment to reinforce a lot of this stuff happens in the quiet. It's not going to happen in the exciting and the bustling and the hustling and the grind. Okay. So the preparation, reflecting, learning, conversations, the different risks that we take, all of that is going to position a person to recognize an opportunity when it arrives. Okay. Now, not to switch gears here, But I just want to highlight real quick that there's also one more ingredient to all of this, and that's openness. Openness of the mind, of the heart. I'm not talking about toxic positivity, nor am I talking about pretending as if life is perfect, because it's not. But also, it's not convincing yourself that everything happens for a reason. And sometimes I think we overplayed that line that things happen for a reason. And you know what? No, sometimes things don't happen for a reason. They just happen because it's a reflection of the consequences of the things that whatever it is that we experienced. You know, openness, the intent of being open, okay, remaining open-minded, opening up your heart, opening up of yourself. What it is, it's a willingness to believe that the story isn't over yet. It's a willingness to believe that something good can still happen for you. It's a willingness to remain curious about what can come next. Because when preparation meets action and action meets openness, something interesting is going to happen. Because here's the thing, when that happens, you're going to start to meet different people along your way. You're going to discover new communities, new opportunities. You're going to find paths you didn't even know or could imagine that would have existed. And then from the outside, it often looks like it's luck. But again, I don't think it's so much luck, but I do think it's exposure. Because when you're open, you can become exposed to the possibilities that were never available to you before, or at least the ones that you were never able to see. So as I watch this happen again, over and over and over, you start to notice patterns. People don't arrive at opportunities randomly. We think they do sometimes, but opportunity is not random. Okay, it's a pattern. Opportunities is a culmination of when people follow a process, they follow a journey, they move through challenging and disrupting times and moments and seasons. There's an increase in awareness, the ability to adjust, to take ownership, radical ownership, whether you caused the thing or you didn't. You take you take you take relentless responsibility. Then there's also growth. So here's the thing, the details can change in terms of how it looks like and how we get here. But the pattern shows up again and again and again in a multitude of areas of our lives. And so, eventually over time, not just through my own life, but studying the lives of others, is this doesn't just come from just one singular individual story, you know. And what I found over time is that change looks a lot like a process. And after looking at all this and the patterns and all the things that I have been able to observe, this is the foundation for what I call C2R2E. And it's not because I felt like the world needs another framework, because I promise you it doesn't. The world has plenty of them. But I built C2R2E for one purpose and one purpose only. I built it because I wanted to offer the world a way to explain what so many people, I think, experience. I wanted to offer a roadmap to be able to help people internalize and figure out for themselves why they feel stuck, why they feel lost, why they feel hopeful one day and then perhaps discouraged the next, and why, despite all of that, many people still find a way to build something meaningful once they get onto the other side. Because here's the thing, C2R2E is built in 5 phases. It's built through collapse, then confrontation, realignment, reclamation, and elevation. So over the next several episodes in this season that we're going to be venturing through together, we're going to explore each one of those phases in depth. So for now, though, until the next subsequent episodes start to come up, which, by the way, I publish on a weekly basis. So every Sunday, I will have an episode ready to go. So, but with that, for now, as we begin to go through this journey, I want you to remember something. Growth is really going to begin with action. And more often than not, it's going to actually begin with awareness. Awareness, once you work at it, is going to help create preparation. And preparation was going to help support the action that you're wanting to take. And then action creates exposure. And then exposure creates opportunity. And then opportunity is what's going to help you build a new baseline. So before we close today, I want to ask you some key reflective questions based off this episode. I'm going to ask you 4 questions here. So bear with me. Pause in between if you need to, or go back following this episode. Just go back to the questions and go through them one by one. Or you can take a notebook, pen and paper. You can jot down your notes, pull out the application option on your phone and use your notes app to jot some notes down. But the point is, I want you to reflect on these 4 questions that I'm about to give you. Okay? So here's question 1. When was the last time you gave yourself enough space and time to think? When was the last time you gave yourself permission to think and be able to sit with that? That's question 1. Question 2. Are you constantly trying to fill the void? Are you constantly trying to fill the silence? Is silence that uncomfortable that you're trying to constantly fill it and drown it out? That's question 2. Question 3. What insight might be waiting for you on the other side of reflection? So just to paint it for you, you're deep in thought. You're reflecting on yourself, your life, maybe some things that you've done, things that may not be working, things that are working. What do you think is waiting for you on the other side of that? That's question 3. Last and final question here. What possibilities might you discover if you remained open to them? And remember, openness of the mind and openness of the heart, openness of yourself. What are the possibilities that if you leave yourself open, you open yourself up to experience? All right, those are the 4 questions that I want to leave with you today. So with that, if last episode was about understanding why transitions feel so difficult, and if you haven't gone through the last episode, I encourage you to take a look at our previous episode here. With that, so if the last episode was about understanding why transitions feel so difficult, know that today's episode is about understanding how new possibilities are actually created. And again, it's new possibilities are not created through luck. They're not created through wishful thinking, blab it, or claiming it. But what opportunities are born through, what possibilities are birthed out of. That's going to be a combination of awareness, preparation, action, and openness. So in our next episode, we're going to begin exploring the first phase of C2R2E. We're going to deep dive on collapse. And that's when the old baseline of our lives stops working and then life begins asking us instead for something new. So with that, I'm Danny DeJesus. This is another episode of The Next Baseline. The description to the entire Elevatus ecosystem is going to be in the description below. And so with that being said, until next time, and I want you to keep asking the question, what do we build? What do we build now in order to reach our new baseline? So with that, I'm going to wish you all the love, peace, and joy, and happiness in the world. Until next time.